Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host. And for this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by Miriama Kamo here in Auckland as well, but on screen. First of all, thank you, Miriama, so much for taking the time to join us. And for those that are listening, who is Miriama?
Ko Miriama Kamo tōku ingoa, ko kai tahumi Ngāti Mutunga o Kuiwi. So I'm Miriama Kamo. I am from Ngaitahu in the South Island and Mutunga and Taranaki and the Chatham Islands. So that's the first thing, I guess. The next thing is that I'm a mum and I have two children, and I love to write. I work as a journalist, and so I work mainly in broadcasting. So I have two programs that I work on, one called Sunday and the other is Marae. So one is our flagship current affairs show at TVNZ, and that's the Sunday program, and then the Māori current affairs program, Marae, which is on every Sunday morning. That's sort of me in a nutshell. But I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing. One of the things that I'm always interested whenever I'm sharing someone's story or someone's journey is there's so many different perspectives of what we can focus about, who we are, it is what we do, and different things. And one of the interests that I wanted to ask you about, if we can explore this, is what got you into being a journalist and being someone that actually is sharing stories?
So I've always loved telling stories since I was a kid. I loved reading, and so I would I'd ride home from school on my bike and stop at the library most days, and you could get out 10 books at a time. I always had up to the limit, and always had books on the go. I was the kid that had the torch under the bed covers, reading through the night. And then I loved to write. I loved to tell stories, and I used to make my poor family sit down and listen to the stories that I wrote. So I remember my dad gave me one of his old diaries, and of course had lots of blank pages in there. He gave it to me for the purpose of writing it, which is exactly what I did. And I used to write all sorts of stories, but I used to really love this character that I created called Janie, and and she used to get up to all sorts of adventures. And so that was my passion as a kid, was reading and writing.
Beautiful. I partly relate because I grew up wanting to be a journalist back in Argentina since I was like 4 years old. I remember reading newspapers every single day, trying to be on the table with the grown-ups and just listening to whatever they were talking about, current affairs and politics and finances, where all of my siblings and my cousins were just, playing. I was staying there listening.
Gosh, that would have been so interesting for you to have grown up in Argentina. I mean, the politics that you would have been exposed to as a child. Wow.
And it was
such stories.
Incredible. Yet the interesting thing was when I actually started working as a journalist, actually current affairs was what put me off of being a journalist. And I stopped after 4 years of working. I was like, it was just, for me at least, and this has to do with Argentina a little bit, but as well, I think that politics in general, for me, was very negative. And I was like, that's enough for me. And I needed to explore something else that wasn't bringing me down all of the time. Do you find that happening for you sometimes?
No, I've always loved being a journalist. I'm not a political journalist, though. Maybe I would feel differently if I was in the gallery, although most political journalists I know are absolutely passionate about it. So I've always worked in current affairs, and really right from the beginning I've worked in long form storytelling. And so that really gives, the opportunity to sit down with people and really spend time with them, getting to know them, getting to understand the issues. And I think that's why I love it so much. That childhood love of story stuck with me, and it stayed with me. And so I'm just a very fortunate person that I really do love my work, and I feel like I followed my calling, and that I was lucky enough to be able to do that and to find the passion to stay in it.
So beautiful. And I'm interested in, Miriama, if you could share, because since I came to New Zealand, I found here the Maori culture to be a big part of New Zealand, yet it's not such mainstream as I thought that it was before I came to New Zealand. And there's a lot of things that through the years living here, I started to learn more and more and more. Would you be able to share from your perspective, what is being Maori in New Zealand, and how is it for you, especially being in a place that you can also share and be able to be someone in the public space that is able to convey some of this knowledge?
So yeah, that's a big question, in the sense that being Maori is such a broad definition, and it's not able to be defined really, I don't think. Whether the Indigenous people of this country, my primary identity is as Maori. It always has been. I was really fortunate that my father who is Maori. In fact, he doesn't have any other blood. He is pure Maori. And then his parents, my grandparents, were very active in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world. And so we were raised on marae, and we were expected to go to hui with them all the time, to meetings, to tangi, all that sort of thing. We were expected to do kapahaka. And my mother, who's Pākehā, was as passionate, about Te Ao Māori, and as my Māori side of the family were. So she was very active in ensuring that we grew up in Te Ao Māori. It was an interesting thing with her and Dad. They came from two very close, big families, but my mother's parents had broken up. So it was interesting for her. She came from a broken family to this very tight, functioning Māori family, who she credits really with, her spiritual growth, and her well-being. And so it's really interesting to have that kind of stereotype subverted, in the background of my childhood. And so for her, Māoridom was a healing place, a beautiful place, and she wanted her children to grow up in it. And so for her 5 children, we all primarily identify as Māori, and it's a very, very strong thing in our lives. To be Māori, I don't think that it's able to be defined, and in fact, it becomes a bit of a political weapon sometimes. Who's Māori, who's not? Who looks Māori? How Māori are you if you don't have Māori typical Māori features? If you don't have a Māori accent, are you Māori? So there's lots and lots of politics around it. My whakaaro, my feeling, my thought is that if you whakapapa, and if you have any Māori whakapapa, then you're Māori, pure and simple. It's, for me, been such a beautiful world to grow up in, and I just feel so lucky. I remember saying a couple of years ago when we did a story with somebody who had not grown up in Te Ao Māori but was starting to connect to it in their adulthood, and had felt ashamed of having Māori whakapapa. And I just couldn't get my head around it, and said to her, I just don't get it, because for me, being Māori is just the best thing in the world. I just feel so lucky. And I couldn't understand how anyone could feel anything other than extreme pride and want to own, that identity. But for some, and for some, it's still a painful thing. And I think that that's just a reflection of the fact that our people were dispossessed. We have been systematically oppressed and stripped of our property, of our rights, of our ability to succeed, of equity, and all of these things add up to you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you don't belong, you shouldn't be here. And so for many Māori, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen, and there's a lot of mahi that needs to be done in Te Ao Pākehā, and that is a reckoning with our past. And that this push at the moment, particularly for partnership, needs to be honoured. And that's the way forward for our country. I really feel like the way that we heal and that we're stronger and we become an incredibly vibrant country is by owning our whole history, our whole story. In fact, as a journalist, I say to my mentees, the whole story is always the best story, with all those inconvenient, messy bits. That's where you find your story, in the shadow and the grey and the bit that doesn't make sense. Look there, and that's where you'll find the most interesting, challenging, fascinating, growthful story. And so, I feel like there's a really big body of work that needs to happen on the side of Te Ao Pākehā. I can feel that there is some mobilization there, and that's really gratifying. It's also kind of a little bit, it's amazing to see. It's happening on a global scale, in fact, of course, as we know, with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and all these movements that are saying enough is enough, and equity needs to happen, and there is no good earthly reason why we wouldn't have it. And I see it reflected in TV programs and advertising. I can see that there's a mindful push for diversity and inclusion, and it's so gratifying and also slightly destabilizing, because that has not been the reality of my upbringing. I did not grow up seeing Māori or brown faces reflected back to me. And so now I feel like I'm starting to really belong to the narrative of this country rather than just representing it. And that's been really exciting. Wow. And really spiritually fulfilling, to see that happening.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's always for me such an interesting perspective, because I grew up in a very different culture, in a very different country, and coming here and seeing and talking with people, and it's such a big topic. And I love the fact that we can actually talk about this, and as you say, that there's a movement towards getting to that place of equity and of giving a space and a platform, and to start to heal those things that need to be healed. And of course, that's going to take time. It's a process and everything, but I think that it's important to keep on bringing it to the table and to be able to give a voice to those that perhaps in the past didn't have that voice. And saying that, one of the things, Miriama, that with the Maori worldview, that as far as I have learned, is well-being in terms of a complete view of well-being. And this takes me to something that for me is really important, that is how we are connected as individuals with ourselves, with each other. And this is something that, in a marae, in a community, you can get that sense, but as well how we are connected to our Mother Earth, to Papatuanuku, and how we treat ourselves and how we treat each other and how we treat the earth. It's all connected into our collective well-being. And I wonder if you could share a little bit of your perspective on this, especially since you started to live a little bit the zero waste life or low waste. What have you found in terms of this overall well-being?
Oh, I totally agree with you. We're all connected. You know, there's so many wisdoms out there. You know, the notion of forgiveness, for example, when you forgive someone, it's not necessarily about saying it's okay. It's about releasing yourself rather than even the other person from that pain and that despair. And so, you know, that's a really lovely, I think, a really lovely, you know, sort of metaphor for connection and how we are all connected. But of course, we're not just connected spiritually, we're connected physically. We share this earth together. That's the one thing we all have in common. We share this earth. And so why would we not want to work together to ensure that we keep the house clean, you know, for our own well-being? So yes, I mean, I completely agree. I love that sense of connection. It's something that really came to the fore with the zero waste journey that I started, and that's what's kept me on the path. So what happened was around about 3 years ago, it'd be now, I was at my mother's place in Birdling's Flat in Canterbury, and it's a really wild, magical place where all sorts of, you know, quite odd, kooky, wonderful, weird things happen. And anyway, it was New Year's Eve, and I don't always make New Year's Eve resolutions, but I thought, well, what would I do if I could? And then I thought, what about this weird thing called zero waste? And, you know, people live with literally they generate no rubbish. Now, could I actually do that? And I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go for a month and let's see how we go. And so it was really just very random, which is often the way that I make decisions to do things, or at least it seems random, you know, which is just to say, okay, well, let's do it. And then I just do it. And so for a month, I went on this journey. I failed almost immediately on it. I remember I went to the mall and I had myself all organized. I, you know, got my little bag and put my cutlery in it, and a little box for lunch, and a cup for, you know, if I wanted to have some tea or something. And I went to the mall, and I was so nervous. Like, it's so bizarre to me now to think how nervous I was, but I was so anxious about going up to someone and saying, could I please have lunch in this box? Or could I have some tea in this cup? It's so second nature to me now that it's so alien that I even had any worries about it. But I was so nervous, and I went to the mall, and I went to the food court, and I looked at each place, and I just couldn't bring myself to go up and ask for lunch in this box that I brought. And so then I was feeling just terrible, and like, I failed. And I thought, come on, Mitty, do something before you go home. And so I went into a T2 shop, and I pulled out my my cup, and I said, can I try that tea? And I'll have it in this cup. And I took the lid off, and it had a little bit of milk in the bottom that hadn't been cleaned out. And it was just so terrible. Straight away, there was just this, you know, sour milk smell. And I was horrified, clapped the lid back on, said, I'm so sorry, I'll come back. And off I went. And I slunk home. Like, oh, not only did I fail to get lunch, but I super failed using the cup. I didn't even check that it was clean before I left. So that was probably the second day, I think, because the first day I made the decision, I stayed at my mum's. Second day I ventured out. And then I remember a week later, I went again somewhere with a box to collect food, and it was from Faro. And I, with, you know, horror and embarrassment, handed my box over for them to put some deli items in, which they did without question, without blinking. It was no big deal for them whatsoever. They put the food in, they gave me the price, and they said, you get 50 cents off for bringing your box. And I was like, nearly fell over. I had no idea how on board some people actually were already. And that not only did they do it unblinkingly, but they gave me a discount. It was so awesome. I just loved that day. That was the day that I was like most triumphant and like, I'm going to stick with this. And so I did stick with it for the whole month. But what happened in that month was that I kept having revelations. And they were all about, as you say, about connection. And I felt really deeply connected in that month to other people, and particularly to the earth and to everything that it sustains. and how much it works to sustain us. That the earth actually, it created us and it can end us. But it does not want to, the earth wants to thrive, and it wants all of its creation to thrive. And I had the deepest, most connected sense of that in that month. And it brought such joy that I stuck to it. So I am still on the zero waste journey and still loving it. And what I say to people now is, it is a journey. I'm not some saint who gets it perfect every day. I fail often, and the journey is to stick with it and to keep going and to stay connected.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I think that it's so important to share some of these stories, like as you say, like going somewhere and not feeling like adequate to be able to give them like your box or all of these little fails that are not fails, are part of that journey, because we're doing something that is different. And as well, I remember a few years ago, I talked with one of my friends, Wellbeing Worth, that we had her on the podcast as well. And she was sharing how, when she started to do this, 8 years ago or more, it was even less of a thing. Now, there's so much more momentum and so much change into being able to go, as you say, to somewhere, and they actively are giving discounts for us to do this, so that we actually understand that. And one of the biggest things for me with this topic, and I would love to have your thoughts on this, is what is the place of privilege in this whole zero waste space? I have my own views, but I would love to hear yours.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me think. I mean, it is a privileged position to be able to spend the time researching and understanding what you need to do to be on this journey, to have access. Often the refilleries can be more expensive than the supermarkets. The supermarkets, often the cheapest food is the worst food that you could be buying. And it's for somebody like me who is resourced, it's not it's a challenging journey to be on, but it's not an impossible one. And I'm so aware of that. It's really important that, as you say, that we acknowledge the privilege of being able to do it, because so many people don't have the space and don't have the resource or education to be able to pursue this. Having said that, there are a lot of families who've been inspirations to me who have a lot of children and somehow manage to live zero waste, who don't make a lot of money and somehow manage to be earth savvy the whole, in their day-to-day living. These people are heroes to me. And so while it is a privilege, it's not impossible, but it's about making it accessible, and about, whether it's policy settings or whether it is, the supermarkets and the sort of day-to-day structure of our lives, the players in that, making their own choices about how to be sustainable and making that accessible to their clients or their customers or their people. And there's not enough of that happening yet. So the privileged structures that we live in have a lot of work to do to make it something that's accessible for everybody.
Yes, definitely. Like I in my view, this space has been mostly a privileged space, because, as you say, like we need to be to find that space for educating ourselves and for learning. And a lot of the what I started to learn at the beginning of my journey was as well like, oh, go and buy this and go and buy that, all of these reusables. And I'm like, this is super expensive. At that time, I wasn't working that much. So I thought, how do I save this? And then I started seeing people saying like, just reuse what you have. Wash that peanut butter jar and just use that instead of something else. And I started to learn through the years of doing this that it's actually the lack of education, one of the barriers, because I find actually it's not that much more expensive. So as you say, like sometimes it's not about how much resources we have, but how are we living? Because I find that the more that I live this lifestyle, the more that I'm slowing down, the more that I am able to, you know, make my own food, grow some of my veggies, go to the farmer's market, go to the refilleries, and do all of these small things that for someone that is fully busy with life and trying to make a living and surviving, perhaps they are not doing that, yet it is possible. And I think that this is why, for me, going back to those views or those ideas of connection with the earth actually is what makes it possible. And for me, why seeing the worldview, the Maori worldview, and understanding that connection, and seeing like spaces like Paracore or other like organizations that are trying to help that to happen, because it's part of what we already care about. Like I usually say to people, before we get into reducing and starting to go plastic free or zero waste, why? Like, why do you care? And it's that piece that is really important.
So important. Oh yeah, and I completely agree with you. Yeah, we need to know why we're doing it. For me, you know, as I said before, it was originally it was just a fun little challenge that sort of threw up a whole lot of whys and reasons why, and that the most powerful of all being that sense of connection back to people and planet. But I think you're absolutely right about connecting back, and for you know, for in terms of that Indigenous piece, you know, it's such an easy way for this country to be able to tap into the climate change issues, because if we do look at the world as we do in Te Ao Māori, which is that we are all connected. We're connected not just to each other, but to the earth and to the atua and to our tipuna, then we will care. So there's a really great saying, you know, be a great ancestor. You know, now be a great ancestor. Make your actions today matter for your future generations. Be a good ancestor. So rather than sort of deifying those who have gone before us, which is important too, but it's about saying, actually, I can be a good tupuna now. You know, today I can do the right thing. And in terms of the structures and frameworks that might be needed for challenging and solving some of the problems that will come, that are here already through climate change, you know, a lot of those answers lie in the environment. They lie in Indigenous wisdoms. They lie in the ability to go into the bush and know, you know, what plants to have, to know how to hunt, to look at the stars, and to know when the time is to rest, as we do with matariki, or to fish, or to harvest. All those things, working in tandem with the environment, with the kaiao. You know, these are wonderful wisdoms that Māori and Pākehā can tap into.
Yes, definitely. And you know, as you say, from like climate change perspective, I think that as well, you know, I love that saying of be a good ancestor, and have that in mind as we are going through this life, and at the same time being aware that this is not something for the future. As you say, like there's stuff happening now, and whenever I talk to someone that is from the Pacific Islands, like this is actually happening now. It's not sometime in the future. And it's something that a lot of times, the more that we understand connection and that we are all one, the more that we are going to be able to act, because that is actually happening.
Exactly. Yes, it is a problem, isn't it? That there is a sense of it's coming, and we probably should get ready sometime, rather than recognizing that actually it's not coming. It's here, and it's getting worse. And people are already suffering around the world. And as you say, the Pacific Islands, a couple of them are in really dire straits in terms of those rising ocean levels. And it's not just about the notion that that there will be more water coming into the environment. It's about, acidic soils and, the responses that we need to have in terms of how we grow food. The soil in this country is being eroded. It's not as easy to find really great quality soil to grow our produce in. We keep building on it. And so, there's the problems that we have are here right now, and they look at our water, trying to clean up the waterways, and what an impossible task it seems, so it shouldn't be. Don't you think? I mean, I felt like with COVID last year, I felt two things. One was how fascinating it was to see how quickly we could respond to an emergency. And the other response was anger, because what it demonstrated more clearly than ever before to me was that inequity is a choice that we make every day. That is a decision that we make every single day, that we do not value equity. But we proved that we can do things differently if we accept that there's an emergency, and we will lock down, we will stop our lives, we'll, we won't go out. We will find the money, the government will find the money that's needed to respond to the problems that we have. But it was really just for COVID. We need that response for the climate. We have said that we have a climate emergency. Well, what does that actually mean? It's not good enough to make a statement. We need to back it up with actual policies, not some frameworks and working parties. And we need some really strong policy action behind it. And it's, it's frustratingly slow.
Yes.
I mean, what are we doing? We've got a plan to reduce 1% of our emissions. What's that about?
By a few years in the future.
Yes, in a few years. We need to halve our emissions, and it couldn't be clearer. And it's not that people don't know that. It's not that our government doesn't know that. It's just that it hasn't taken its own climate emergency declaration seriously enough.
Yes, thank you for raising that, because I do think that for me, the same, like COVID showed us, like the entire world can just, we can all decide we're all in this together, like not only countries, the entire world can decide that and suddenly like change. And this, again, as you were just saying, it shows that everything else doesn't matter as much. Like all of the lives that are being endangered, all of the inequities that we have, and everyone that is being like modern slavery and unethical use of our resources and people, all of that, it's not as bad as some of us believe, because we are not acting upon it as we are with COVID. So I think that is so valid. And
so frustrating, isn't it? But so how do we get past that? I mean, we have to accept that government is not going to be the savior on the white horse. Of course, government wants to do the right thing. I do actually have faith in that. But I think we cannot wait for government, and we need to be making changes in our everyday lives. I talked recently about this notion of being an activist in your own home, and that you can activate every day in your own life. You don't need to be scared of the notion of being an activist, but if it does worry you, then think of it as activating. And what can I do every day in my own life to revolutionize my existence and the existence of those that I love? So just in your own home, and if all of us are doing this in our own home, thinking about that question, how can I activate every day to take care of those I love? That's what we need. Then before you know it, we're all on the same waka, rowing in the same direction, and government responds.
Yeah, so beautiful. Like I was just going to ask you one thing that you thought that it was important for people to hear, but I think that's it. Like, and this is one of the messages that with conscious action we share a lot, is that you do matter, and the actions that you take every single day actually matter. And we need to understand that, yes, we might seem to be separate, but all of us together, we are a network of thousands or millions of people that are creating slowly that change. And at some point, it will go really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's we're in a really fascinating time, aren't we? You know, it's a really fascinating time to be alive. And wouldn't it be cool to be able to one day look back and say, we did make a change, you know, we actually activated and we secured things. And, you know, that's a process and it's a journey that we kind of need to go on globally, but it's not impossible. We can actually do. I mean, look at those movements that we mentioned earlier, the Black Lives Matter and Me Too and Time's Up movements. All of the big protest movements that have happened in the past, the civil rights movement, the protests that we've had in this country that have made change, the foreshore and seabed protests, we know how to activate. We know how to demand change. We're not going to always get it, but we know how to ask for it. And we are able to be inspired and motivated by that. So we can do it. It's just a matter of activating to do so.
Beautiful. And lastly, Miriama, how can people find you and follow you?
Oh, gosh, okay, let me think. So I'm not very good on the whole social media thing, to be honest with you, but I am on Facebook. So I do have a professional page under my name on Facebook, and I do have an Instagram page. Both of them are just Miriama Kamo. But now that you've said that, I feel like, okay, I need to actually get back in and start activating on Facebook. So when I was doing that 1 month of zero waste at the beginning, I posted most days about the discoveries that I was making, or the little fails, the things that I was trying to bake my own bread, for example, and nailed it sometimes and failed other times. I was really addicted to kombucha at the time, and I didn't want to keep on buying bottles. So what I was doing is trying to find a refillery. And even 3 years ago, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that easy, rather, to find a refillery. So every day I would post about these little adventures, and they did resonate. So I sort of feel like you've given me the little push that I need to get back on there and share what I do. It's funny, isn't it? Because it sort of becomes second nature, and what you do in your home, you forget that it's maybe still a little bit unusual for people. But occasionally I do remember to post. So I did every day I drink oat milk, but I make it myself, and it literally costs a few cents, maybe. It wouldn't be much more than, I would think, 5 or 10 cents a bowl of oat milk, which is literally just whizzing up oats and water and ice and throwing that on my cereal without straining it. And that was a great little thing that I started doing maybe a year ago when I didn't want to be buying oat milk. So I've never drunk cow's milk. I never liked eating it since I was a child. So I've always drunk milk alternatives. And this was a really neat discovery that I made about, I can just make it myself, and it's so cheap, and there's no mess and no waste, and lots and lots of little discoveries like that. But I should be thinking more mindfully about sharing.
Yes, but as well, a lot of it is still online and people can find it, but it's of course easier when we keep on sharing it and repeating the message, because there's always new people listening. So yes.
Well, thank you, Brian. I will up my game on that front.
And thank you, Miriama, for being able to be here with us and for sharing a little bit of your story and what you're doing. And thank you for being able to inspire others to be the change that they want to be as well.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. It's one of the wonderful things about this journey, is that I get to connect with with people like you who are doing so much to create change in our world and for people. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe.
Thank you everyone for listening as well. And if you learned something and something resonated with you, let us know in the comments. We would love to know about that. So until the next episode, bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.